Archaeodeath, Death and Memory, Past and Present, with Professor Howard Williams. Welcome, everybody, to another Archaeodeath interview. And I'm really excited to be talking today to Ophelia. And Ophelia, please introduce yourself as a Beowulf expert.
Hi, Howard. Thank you so much for asking me to come on today. My name is Dr. Ophelia Eryn Hostetter. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University-Camden, where I teach Old and Middle English. I'm obsessed right now with Old English and translation theory, material culture, cultural theories, and things like that. And I've been intrigued about the relationship, how, the equal sign, right, between the poem of Beowulf as a curated piece of historical fiction
Yes.
and the material archaeological record as it stands.
That is something that is one of many reasons we could have a chat. And this is such a, and hopefully it's a window into so many other aspects of the interface in medieval studies between text and archaeological context and material culture. But I mean, I've dabbled in Beowulf and made comments about it, but I've never it intimidates me. There's so much great literature on it, but I've been so much enjoying your TikToks on this, and you've been taking us through it as a guide, and it's like starting my education again, because I never studied this at university. It's just
Mhm.
picked up as a postgraduate, having had archaeological training. So it's been a real joy. And I've just been reading one of your articles about disruptive things in Beowulf, which has just been yes, oh, and yes, oh, and that's interesting. And I'm going to resist quoting some of these wonderful turns of phrase you have in this paper, but
Uh,
I thought it was I thought it just really captured so much of the what I understood, about how the kind of, I say misuse, but the casual use of Beowulf by archaeologists and archaeology by Beowulfists, Old
mhm.
English,
Yeah.
medievalists, literary specialists, different terms that I probably misuse, but people who study the poem,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah.
really wanted to sort of delve into some of your ideas on this, which are really, really, really chimed with some of my thinking and really made me think again. And I love that because you in this piece you're talking about how the power of the thingness of the poem, how materially grounded it is, because things drive the storyline and the
Mhm.
context matter. We don't know exactly, and this is where people get seduced because they think, oh, now we've got to link this to a piece of archaeological evidence, but we don't
Mhm.
know exactly what the objects look like that are described, what the halls look like, the
Mhm.
boats, you know the
Yeah.
you know but those things, whatever they may have looked like to different audiences in the early Middle Ages and afterwards, they certainly matter in the poem, and that's what I
Mhm.
think is the central crux of what you get at here. I think it was. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to, Howard. Um, what I found fascinating about the poem, and as I was kind of working my way through it, I was really seduced, let's say, by the new materialisms. People like Timothy Morton and Jane Bennett, philosophers on this kind of strange area. They talk about kind of a spectral life of objects that they draw us, right? They're not actually alive, but they might as well be. And in Beowulf, the poem is full of two things, and it's not monsters, actually. It's implications. So,
Mm,
like, there are very subtle, like, shady lines. Like, it might have been like that, right? It's full of implications, but it's also full of things. And the things often stand in for the expressions of emotion between people, affect, loyalty, friendship. So, a language like Old English that can use a term like gold friend, right? Was it? Yeah, Goldfriend or Goldwina,
yeah,
to talk about who your Lord is, right? Um, the important term of that is the gold, right? That if you say you can do something in the court and the Lord gives you something valuable in return for it, you're expected to do that.
yeah,
but that is also his expression of love for you. Like, and probably more than just friendship, because this is a homoamorous kind of world where people are, they're little more than friends. It's a bromance kind of environment. But then your love for that Lord is expressed in the acts that you do for him, the loot you pillage, but also the price of your body, right, in war or whatever, political action. And so like the thingness of Beowulf underlines, I don't know, underlines the right word. I think it shows why people want so much for that equation to the material remnants, because those people aren't much if they're not things. But it makes us think also now that we're not much without our things, because we're kind of not.
And for me, it's like no one would doubt that there are broad characteristics we can see between a geographical and chronological broad field of historical and archaeological inquiry and the poem, but the poem is selectively about not every object, not every context. It's a very stylized world, isn't it, where you talk about the vibrancy of things, but of thing power. I love that phrase as well, and the vibrancy, but this isn't about everything. You make the point that like drink is part of that elite culture, but not every piece of bread or meat that is consumed fits this, has the same aura or same efficacy. And so it's not the poem is a stylization. It's not trying to say the whole of the world. People like translate, the world of Beowulf. Early medieval people, like, as a generic, all people thought all objects meant this, and it's like, no, you're talking about very specific objects, acquired in particular ways, exchanged in a very ceremonial, stylized way. Is that a fair sort of sense of things?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? I am heartily tired of people in my field, right?
Yeah.
Grown ass men with PhDs saying something like, this small set of monastic letters tell us the Anglo-Saxon spirit towards friendship. And you're like, no, that is the 5 people involved in those letters.
Yes.
Right. There is nothing universal about that particular moment. But also that love or that think power is very partial. The wood is not important, right? Harrow rod is important as a wooden object, but its aura is in the sociality and the gold and everything inside of it, right? But that's the only wooden object that's important other than a ship, which is important because it's laden, right?
That's really interesting. I mean, I don't want to be too I don't know, the style of my interviewing may not be to your liking, so do correct me if I'm over demanding of you. But I'd love to go through some of the individual objects you address. And for example, the introduction, the way you introduce this is with a sword, and the sword that is brought, and literally the act of placing it as a mnemonic, in the Finsbury fragment. Could you explain that example? Because that's the way you open that article.
So I'll contextualize it for your non-specialist audience. So in 2 parallel stories, the fight at Finnsburg interpolated narrative in Beowulf that occurs in the celebration of Grendel's death. And it's reflected in something called the Finnsburg fragment. They're 2 separate poems, but they're related somehow. The Danes, led by Hnaf, go to visit his sister Hildeberg, who is married to Finn, a Frisian. There is some kind of cataclysm, a fight, and people allied to Finn kill Hnaf and Hildeberg and Finn's son in the fight. But just as the Danes are about to wreck shop to punish Finn, they get iced into the harbor. So like unexpectedly, or they were just there too long, and they can't go home. So they have to kind of lick their wounds over the winter. Finn says, you guys are welcome in the hall, and I will give as much gold to you as I give to my retainers, and there will be no crosstalk. And anybody who crosstalks, my people who crosstalk are going to get punished. So the spring comes and the ice unlocks, right? And what's his name? Hengist is the name of the guy in charge. A retainer brings Hnaf's sword and he lays it on the lap And Hanav says, yes, you're right. It's time to murder everybody. So what's interesting about this, and I've done a little more work on the language of swords. It's coming out in an article that I'm hoping to have out soon. But the word for sword often in Beowulf is L-A-F, laf. Now, I don't know what you remember of your old English, but laf means leaving. It's actually cognate to left, to leaving, to leave behind. And so it means relic, it means artifact, it means heirloom. It then means sword because it's often like Wiglaf, the retainer at the end of Beowulf, his name is literally sword. The war leaving. But corpses are sword, are laf. Endeleof is the people left over after one of the Yiddish wars later. Widows are laf. So what's going on is the sword is less a sword as a cutting and killing instrument, and more a bloody, throbbing connection to you and your fathers. Right? There's a fight later in the poem that's told by Beowulf. He's projected by Beowulf, and it's over a sword because the Yathobards say, are you going to let that guy carry your father's sword that he stole from him? And then they have a fight and break up the wedding.
So it's almost like baked into the language of swords is the idea that they are either in use and of the person who's wielding or wearing, or if detached from it, they are intimately connected to that person. So that links into all these ideas of, so when that sword is laid at Hengist's feet or on his lap or wherever it's put, it is a gesture that cannot be ignored. The witnesses who would see it, he either shows cowardice or shows a breakage of obligations, moral, social, political, or he has to see that gesture for what it is, as as good as Snef telling him, pick up my sword and continue my work, revenge. Wow, that's very dramatic.
And it's easy to miss if you can't, for us, like on the other side of language, or used to calling sword something else, like you don't see that social implication. So like this is why I started the article with that, because it's like a really graphic and gripping like tell of the emotional and almost spectral life, the emotional existence and spectral life of these things.
And you take it again. I respect if you want to go in a different direction, but I'd love to jump to your one of the key case studies in your article is the talk that's given to Beowulf. So
I can talk about that for weeks.
Because it's important, I think, to balance. It's not just about weaponry, is it? It's about other precious things, and how it's described. I thought the way, because it's not described in this is the biography of this object. This is not been seen, if I'm right in saying, since, and then goes off on this tangent about other things, which is amazing, isn't it? A good rhetorical device to say, this is so cool that it's so you won't have seen. Here's even better things that we don't even know. I thought, I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh yeah. So in this moment, it's after that story. It's after the story of Hildeburg, right? So that ends as you might think, right? Everybody dies. The Danes take Hildeburg back to Denmark. Hrothgar is super pumped on Beowulf, and he says, "I adopt you in my heart," even though he has two sons who are like 10, 12 years old. And there's a nephew of his brother who might want the throne, right? He says which will become a problem in the history as it's projected. Hrothgar's wife, Wealhtheow, brings him a special group of treasures to celebrate, right, to honor him. One of them is the greatest of neck rings. So we don't know what it looks like. It might be a torque, but it could be a neck chain, right? It's covered with jewels. We get some intimation of. And most might mean better, but it also might mean bigger too, right? So the most of, right? Great meaning large. But the narrator is just dazzled by it. He's like, I have never heard of anything like this. And he says, it's better than mythological objects that we've heard of. The creation of the Brosings, who are in the story of the Nibelung, right? And Siegfried, which has been referred to earlier. But it's also better than something Hama stole from this legendary tyrannical king Jormunricha, right? Maybe 300 years before.
Yeah.
Frequent character in some of these. He's in Deor, and he's mentioned in Deor, and he's mentioned in Wheatsea. But then Beowulf takes this thing, and then this is obvious. This is a bribe.
Yeah.
Right? He's like, you don't have to be cool about it. This is a bribe. She's saying, take my stuff and go. But she basically threatens him. She says, the Danes feel like I do. And if you try to take the kingdom, we'll fight. We'll stand up against you. Right? And Beowulf's cool. He's like, yeah, I see. Like, but so we get this sort of arc of time that this neck ring sort of represents. And then we switch to the future suddenly. And we find out later that Beowulf gives that neck ring to Hugd, who is Huyalak's wife. So Huyalak is his king. And he wears it on his final raid. And it says he possessed that torque on his final journey when he defended the treasure under his battle, protected his battle spoils, ill chance seized him when he sought a feud with the Frisians. So same people that were in the story. He wore that ornament, those precious stones. He fell under his shield. He passed them on into the grasp of the Franks. His mail shirt and that torque together. A lesser warrior plundered the kill. So like, it is almost a curse, right?
That's really interesting. So I'd never really followed that through or thought that through at all, I confess. And for me, that says for the poem's devices, the objects are about the past, but also about the future from the perspective of the audience, and where those objects are going. It's not really the key point, but I'd like some clarification because I don't know. Is the idea that Hrothgar is like his either because of the circumstances of beating the monster Grendel, he's too obligated beyond what's normal to. And therefore, almost Wealhtheow's sort of countering that threat.
Yeah,
is that the way to think about it?
It's definitely that's a way to think about it. It's that. Oh, here, sorry, my laptop just said it was running out of battery, and I'm just looking for a solution.
Oh, right, okay,
here we go.
Sure.
I got it. But it just needed to be plugged in. The something about the poem is interesting that way. That Hrothgar, we have to remember, Hrothgar has ruled the Danes for 50 years. Now, 50 years doesn't have to mean 50 years because 50 years seems to be used as a large indefinite number.
Okay.
Right? Like 12 is in the poem. The numbers are a little fuzzy. He's ruled for a long time. He may have come into power under shady circumstances. He came under power under shady circumstances. He's had 12 years where he's unable to protect his people from Grendel and lived in the women's quarters, right? His rule is falling apart. He doesn't have adult children, and he has this perhaps nephew that's going to supplant him. So it does seem like he's too obligated. And I like that reading, that the way to say it. He's too obligated. Beowulf has done something amazing. He's killed 2 monsters, right? Things that no one could do.
Yeah. Of course, this comes after this is after both. I forgot that. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the situation's replayed with the Yeats, with Huyalak, because Huyalak has a son. Huyalak dies unexpectedly in that raid. The queen says, Beowulf, you're the guy. You need to take over. And Beowulf's like, no, Hjardred is an okay guy. He'll take care of it. Hjardred, of course, fucks everything up. And Beowulf is king after all. Maybe under suspicious circumstances. Who knows?
Yeah, obviously it jumps through a lot of the detail and you're either supposed to know or it doesn't matter. But so the talk, again, I mean, again, this is not relevant to our discussion, but it does relate to the issue of the archaeological connection up. Because unless I'm sure there's more experts in this than me, but for me,
Mhm,
talks are a real problem because we literally, depending on where you geographically locate this or
mhm,
conceptualize early, we have lots of Viking Age neck rings, right? But we
right.
don't really have anything. We don't. I mean, either we don't have it and it happened,
Mhm,
or
mhm,
it didn't happen, but we don't really have any evidence people from the after the migration period,
mhm.
were wearing this stuff, on the
Yeah.
regular, or
Mhm,
this would have been an exception. So we have these migration period gold, really exceptional net rings.
mhm.
We have from the sort of late 5th century. Are they remembering something so fabulous,
Mhm,
that wasn't in circulation? That's the point.
mhm,
Or are they thinking of something that many a king and many a aristocrat had, but
mhm,
this was better? But either
mhm.
way, it shows the problems of trying to, shoehorn the archaeology to the poem in. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can find a link, but you have to really force it. And
Mhm.
perhaps that's not the point. I don't know.
No, I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Because that's one of those things I just assume are part of the world because they're always spoken of in these legendary poems.
Yeah,
And I think what it brings up to me, and this is not entirely like a change of subject, but it's like Beowulf is often argued to be very early, like the
yeah,
first Old English poem, like 670 maybe,
yeah,
right? And some of that is well, I think the arguments are bad, but some of that is about the history, about its connection to history and the material culture.
yeah,
So if torques are not something worn by Anglo-Saxon kings later in the period, and the form of kingship totally changes
yeah,
in many, many ways as the kingdoms proceed. Then it must have been written as a direct reflection of kingship at its time,
yeah,
which is not necessary. It's kind of specious
yeah,
because most of the poetry remembers a continental culture that's not current,
yeah.
right?
So yeah, the talk could very well be from back then and back there, because the whole
Mhm,
scene is from a English perspective,
mhm,
is from far away and back in the
mhm,
day. You don't have to have a precise historical understanding of time and its passing for this talk to be in its form as well as its
mhm.
character, just exotic and the type of things that kings of old did. And that's
Yeah,
surely enough. We don't have to
right.
imagine, oh, and here's an archaeological evidence showing they exactly had this. That
Mhm.
misses the point, I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the poem itself takes pains in several moments to emphasize its anthropological nature that we would call anthropological, but
Yeah.
they would, I don't know what they would call, because chronicle histories are different and those
Yeah.
kinds of recollections of the past are different. But before Beowulf shows up, um, the narrator says something about how the Danes, in their desperation, gave sacrifices to their ancient idols.
Oh, yes, yes.
And then it says, Swa vilch thas theach, theach, that such was their custom,
Yeah.
which is not a condemnation.
No.
It just says pagans be like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, it says they in their hearts they remembered hell and pity the poor people that don't have salvation to get them through these moments, and so you get a real a sense of how post conversion Christians might have looked at time,
Yes,
right?
yes. It's not, you don't need to make it a judgment beyond the fact this is from those times, as
Yeah.
was their. Yeah, that makes absolutely perfect sense. And likewise, if you use that same, the poem doesn't, but if the poem had said, a great net ring, as was their custom, you've got
Hmm.
the same point, haven't you? You've got the
Hmm.
material is doing the same job of telling you of
Yeah.
those times.
Hmm.
So the talk is fascinating, and I just love the idea of this sort of legendary, an object that's like legendary objects.
Hmm.
But you also talk about, of course, the sword from the mere, from beneath the
Oh
mere,
yeah.
sorry,
Mhm.
and how that's used by, because Hrothgar reads it, he reads the runes
Yeah.
literally. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just
He's trying to
fascinating
put
to
you
me.
out of
I'd love
work,
to hear your
Howard.
take on that more. Yeah.
He's trying to put you out of work, Howard. He's doing your job. He's reading objects.
They're all
No,
archaeological.
absolutely. It is a piece of living history to him, even though, it's legendary. We don't know why those runes are on the hilt.
Yeah.
Or even if there's some doubts that they're even a whole story on there, that it's like the Frank's casket maybe, and just says enough to make you think about the entire legend, right?
I think that's always what I assumed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh yes, you know, you know, and let me expound on nothing that actually is said here, but let me just tell you what it means to me, type thing.
And that's definitely how Hrothgar takes it, because he goes into what's called his homily or his sermon. Age, it happens to everybody. Age or a spear or disease will take you when you least expect it, Beowulf. So be good and be virtuous and all these things, right? It's sort of like lecture on kingship. But it's triggered by this stuff on this giant sword hill that looks like an account of the actual like the biblical giants, right? The gigantas, which is in the poem. They say gigantas earlier in the poem and they refer to giants. But
I mean, that is actually perhaps an unfair question, perhaps, but I want to ask anyway, because I just feel when we're talking about giants in an old English context, do we have any envisage? We're so biased by our modern fantasy literature, and do we have any sense of what that means in terms of scale of object? Is it just an old is it just a normal sized old sword hilt, or are we? Is it fair to expect that we actually are referring to something really big?
That's a great question. That's not an unfair question at all. So the poem says the greatest and best of blades. Now, like I said about the ring, the neck ring, that doesn't necessarily mean huge, right? It could just mean of great quality, right?
Yeah.
And Eotenish is sometimes used in the literature to mean just spectrally or uncannily other, like the line that gets repeated a lot, Iald or Thank Gigant or Eotena, right? Like the work of giants, the ancient work of giants. It comes up twice in Beowulf. One of the times in the Barrow. The Barrow is described as that. It's in Andreas. It's used in the Wanderer. It's used in Maxims 1 or 2, Maxims 2. And there's been a lot of speculation on that. That's not to the culture's credit usually, because I mean you've probably heard this too, right? Like the idea of the medieval people as inherently childlike.
Yeah.
So they see like the Roman ruins and they're like, oh wow, adults build these things like they're babies, which is garbage.
Yeah.
Though you can express wonder without being infantilized. And so, but also extant giants that I'm remembering don't have set scale, because like the frost giants, the Jotun, right, in the I guess they're called the Fornaldar sagas, right, the really mythological Icelandic sagas, or in the Eddas or something like that, they have radically wildly varying size. Like in one of I forget what it's called. It's about this foster son. He's the foster son of some giantess. And in one scene, she's 25 feet tall. And in the next scene, she's larger than him, but small enough to have sex with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know there's a whole trippy like kink about that, but we don't have to go into it. So like, it's hard to say, right? In a Thurs or a troll isn't used in English. Troll.
No.
But Thurs is, and we don't know really what that means. And the word Eoten, which Tolkien turns into Ent, could mean Jute. Like it's the people that killed the Danish people in that fight in the story. They're probably Jutes. They're probably not giants.
Yeah.
Right. So it could be like I had said this. I said something on my video the other day. Like there's a character in Final Fantasy VII, and he wields a sword that is as long as his body.
Yeah.
Right. He's like this little Twinkie guy, and he has this giant ass sword. Right. That could be what's going on here. Right.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just long. Like they made those really long swords later in the Middle Ages.
It intrigues me as an open question now that there's been the redating of the Cern giant, the chalk hill figure,
Mhm.
to the either 8th to 11th centuries, or that
Oh, that's
parameters and various
amazing.
debates about
Yeah.
that. Because that's supposed to be Hercules, and
Mhm.
but I'm just interested. I mean, because equally we should not infantilize people into saying they had to have a canon size of giant, and
Mhm.
they must have had debates around. No, I think you'll find that in the third poem that we're reading today, the giant is definitely over this, like having arguments like Star
Mhm.
Wars fans or Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons fans. They actually, I don't think
Yeah.
that we'd have to impose that level of nerdom or nerdiness or
I
nerdom
love it.
on
Yeah.
onto. But I think it just does strike me whether they simply mean an old feigned object or they mean something the size of a you go, yeah, I killed it with this. It's like, well, by many because of the weight probably crushed poor
Yeah.
Grendel's mum.
It didn't have anything to do with cutting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, no, I'm just going
No,
off
no,
on
no,
a
that's amazing.
tangent.
And I love that idea, right? Because I came into medieval English or medieval literature as a girl, looking at those kinds of books, those kind of speculative monster picture
Yeah,
books. It'll say like giants have to be this big and an ogre
yeah,
is
yeah,
this big. Or playing Dungeons and Dragons,
yeah, yeah,
right? An
exactly.
ogre is this size and has this many hit points, and
Yeah, yeah.
like,
But anyway, I sorry to go off on a tangent there, but I was really
no,
so
that's awesome.
we've dealt with the sword in the fight at Finborough. We've dealt with the talk. We've dealt with the giant's hilt. But
Mhm.
the other one you talk about in this article, I'd love to hear your take on, and I really the one that matters to me most because people have tried to deploy it in archaeology
Mhm.
more times than I've had hot dinners. Is the horde, the dragon's horde,
Oh
or
yeah,
should we say it's not really? It becomes a dragon's horde, but of course it
yeah,
is the last survivors horde. I don't know how to
yeah.
describe it, but you take it away because you know how to deal with this better than me. But so what?
Oh
How
yeah.
is that? How does that have the vibrancy for the poem?
Well, I love this example. This is why I started that article in the first place, right?
Oh,
Because it's such an amazing thing. Because not only does it have like a romantic, tragic, interpolated narrative, but it also invokes the possibility of magic. Like when we're talking about spectral life of objects, this is said to be bound by a Galdor, that no one can own it unless God said so, right? I guess it's always a get out of jail free card. Um, but um, but I think I, that magic fascination, almost magic, or could be explained as magic, fascination of antiquity placed in something. I mean, it's said to be 1,000 years old.
yeah,
Who knows? We're talking about people so old they don't have records of them, right?
yeah.
They don't know who put it. They say, yeah, it's not. They use this great phrase. It's like not. What is it again? Oh, not will gumen and not wilch, which means some people or other. Like I don't know who. That's what I love that compound word. Um, but it's sort of akin. I mean, I can see why it gets like misread or in like
Yeah,
imaginatively occupied because that kind of contact with antiquity
yeah,
encourages that. Like when you go
yeah,
into the museum as a kid, you're just like,
yeah,
oh, like I see your
yeah,
videos where you're going to museums, and I'm
yeah.
just like,
I get excited.
oh, right. Um, and then it takes the next step of like rationalization or
Yeah,
kinship, right? Like why was it put there? And then
yeah,
so it has this weird story where the last survivor, this person tagged as the last survivor, says they imagine his words when he buried his entire people
yeah.
and laid their stuff in the grave. And
So
I love
I find so.
the
I
place.
mean, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just really interested in how the power of this is as an assemblage, as you rightly say. It's not.
Yeah,
They describe a range of objects. I can't remember the description off the top of my head,
yeah.
but the point I gained from that is you're supposed to, as an audience, just say shed loads more of everything that you could possibly imagine and then some. It's trying to keep
Yeah.
that. It's just that you're supposed to get a sense of and it's all useless. It's all collectively not going anywhere, and that sort of scale of almost the horror for an audience where you rarely see, as a normal person in whatever century is listening to this, you'd
Mhm.
see occasional bling on people, gived and received at special events. You'd but the idea is, kings have treasuries, that somewhere you're never going to
Mhm.
get to see it. Somewhere they've got a hoard, but the idea that it's not being used, it's not being given out, it's not being circulated, they're not going on raids to get more, or it's just it would be almost, you know um ontologically, is that the right word, just
Mhm.
disruptive, in the way
Yeah.
that you talk about in the poem. In your article, it takes it
Yeah.
to a level of, it's almost horrific for them, I would imagine.
It's yeah,
What, you're
it's
not you're
yeah,
not
it's
using it,
yeah,
I have the
yeah,
same stress when I see people not eating cake. I go, "What? You're not going to eat a pizza bit to slice it?" No, my mind. You can't just leave
yeah,
that. But this is another
yeah,
level.
yeah, absolutely. It's almost offensive.
Yeah,
And but this is the thing. I mean, this is how like avarice was articulated on through the Middle Ages as a sin, was like having things but not using them or sharing
yeah,
them. But we have these like collective treasure spaces. I would say there's like three through the poem. This is something that I've been thinking of since I wrote that. That's like 2017. You have sort of the hoard of Rothgar, which is
yeah,
not ever seen only but except in like its distribution.
yeah,
Like he has 8 horses and he's going to give them to you. That's how big his hoard is, right?
yeah,
Um, those things. It's just the stream out of. And then Beowulf swims down to Grendel's mother's
yeah,
Nithsel, her hall of malice, and it's full of treasure also, right? There's treasures all over it, plus this giant sword.
yeah,
That is not in circulation. It's like separated from economy by a dark, cold, dark water and snakes, right? Um, so this is kind of a negation of the hall as a point of social order, a locus of circulation. Then you get to the barrow that has a dragon in it, and this is something you could never make an agreement with, a pact with,
no,
right? And it just sits in a space that not only negates all the values around it and even all the things everybody's fighting for around it. Like, forget the fighting the dragon. Like, why are the Yeats and the Swedes fighting each other, right?
yeah,
We had this war pounding on top of it. But its fate at the end, when it says like idle and unnut swa arowas, right? Idle and empty and not useless, just as it always was, kind of coldly expresses what will become of the Aeons, what will become of all of us, all of
yeah.
our peoples, all of
It's a
our
warning. Yeah,
Ufara. Yeah, it's a warning. And we have all this great stuff, but it will rot and molder in some kind of holding somewhere, or a storage unit, or your grandma's attic, something, right? The materiality that makes your world meaningful will collapse into uselessness at some
but
point.
this. I mean, this may be. You must correct me because I'm just making stuff up here and guessing. But it just made me strike me that the hall. You mentioned the hall earlier is not just wood. It's an assemblage of horn and
Mhm.
iron is mentioned,
Mhm.
if I remember rightly from what you were
Yeah,
saying in the
that
article.
braces the
It,
wooden boards.
it's a constructed assemblage in itself,
Mhm. Yeah.
and like the barrow, it
Mhm.
not like the barrow, but there's a connection to the barrow in the sense that it is made useless by the terror of Grendel.
Mhm.
And so it's a space that should, but it is like a kind of, but it's not a treasure hoard. I thought that far
Mhm.
before, the idea of
Mhm.
a hall as an assemblage adorned
Mhm.
and then made useless. But what I hadn't thought of is, you know, you never get to see this treasury. Why
Mhm.
doesn't Grendel plunder the treasury? But Grendel only takes statements of retribution against the people in the hall. He doesn't say, "Oh, and he weed all over the precious treasures and he ripped off a bit of." The hall is
Mhm.
broken, but not. defamed. It is left
Mhm.
deliberately,
Yeah.
so I could you have to imagine. I wonder, I'm just thinking, would you imagine, you could say, well, I've killed all these guys, I could easily now
Mhm.
just take all the loot, but I'm not. I'm going to leave you here with this stuff with no one to give it to, and no one
Yeah.
who could,
Uh-huh.
I don't know, it just seems to me that's at the heart of the horror of it, that he's left the hall with its treasures. I don't know.
Yeah, he has a radically different value system that seems monstrous, just as it probably seemed monstrous when colonists came to the Americas or Africa and saw people that live in radically different ways,
Yes.
and they thought they're children or monsters, right?
So you've got so you're moving forward with this, with work on swords, with work on other
Mhm.
aspects of the poem, and
Mhm.
I also want, I think we should say for non-readers, it's not just about Beowulf. In the article and elsewhere, you've talked about other sources that show this materiality of the
Mhm.
thing power, the
Mhm.
of objects, from relics, holy relics, to
Mhm.
there's other allusions. This isn't just about one weird poet with his vision of the world. This seems to be
Mhm.
part of a broader network of thinking. Is that fair to say?
I think so. um one part of the problem is that Beowulf is the only poem of its kind
Well,
in the
yeah,
in the literary record, right? Which is why people love it and think it's precious, but it also is dangerous to make big statements from.
yes,
But there's a, I mean, there are more. There's a few. I mean, yeah. What it is like the riddles. I would jump to the riddles,
okay,
which go to the spectral fascination, the vibrancy of insubstantial objects, like the things that Beowulf wouldn't represent, because there's like a loom and a writing well and a bookcase or an
yeah,
oven, right, or an onion,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
There's like, it's like, how do things how would a shovel, a rake, there's a poem about a rake, there's a riddle about a rake, what would a rake tell you about its existence if it didn't have to follow your rules of how the world works? Like, what does rake epistemology look like, right? And
yeah.
so that I think there's that might, right, I don't want to say there's, of
No, no,
course, like
no,
a
no. Yeah, yeah,
universal, but there,
sure.
that might indicate fascination with this enmeshment, to use Hodder's term,
Yeah,
with the material, because humans have to be enmeshed to exist,
yeah,
right? We're just like cold monkeys if we don't have stuff. Um, so, but you see this in things like the Dream of the Rood, right? The cross poem, right, with its talking and becomes like a, what is it called, a reliquary, right? And moves from like a
yeah.
giant bleeding scary vision to the cross on the crucifix on the guy's chest. And um, um, places like the poems like the Ruin have an aspect of that, right, where
Yeah,
there's this place. It may not be a real place, right? Like, it's
yeah.
sometimes identified with Bath, but it's not. It doesn't have to be.
No,
There's
no.
poems like that from all across Europe in the Middle Ages, like Latin poems. Um, and wondering what's empty. Like, there's a lot like the Dragon's Hoard, right? These things are empty of the thing of what makes them meaningful. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of other moments. Um, yeah, I see the riddles are my fascination right now. Like,
Yes,
I'm only
but
right. I'm only talking about Beowulf accidentally, just because I teach on it all the
but
time.
they take us into a different world of things, but they are
Mhm.
still, or not, or maybe they're multiple meanings, but they are, it shows a world where that connection to landscape. So I suppose the bigger question, which I'm struggling with, is where does this leave us with, because a lot of these theories have been used by
Mhm.
archaeologists to refer
Mhm.
to material assemblages,
Yeah.
from humble pottery to, you know
Mhm.
the, and I've tried to raise some of these ideas in relation to other sets of objects myself,
Mhm.
but perhaps not as effectively as you have, I feel.
Mhm.
But I think they certainly, there's more potential for synergy, but not at the point of, oh look, that's exactly what was said in Beowulf. It's about,
Mhm.
it's not trying to make those one-to-one equations, I suppose. But I
Mhm.
just, I'd love your views on where we go with this in terms of conversations with
Mhm.
different data sets, different
Oh
data
yeah.
sets. material assemblages, if you like, both literary
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
physical.
Yeah, make an assemblage of literary, historical, and archaeological inquiry. Um, I hear that, and one aspect of Riddle's criticism that I have a really hard time with is you will get these like reenactment dudes, right?
Yeah.
Who'll say like, "This is exactly what an Anglo-Saxon well looks like," and then they come into the riddle and they say, "Well, this explains this, 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 and this." I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, girl, thanks, right? But it's, I mean, because it's is and is not a well in the poem, right?
Right.
It doesn't have to be something else. It could be many things. But there's that there's like an issue with that, just the same as you would do with Beowulf. But I'm trying to put my head together about this. I think it's a fact, or it seems like a tendency that modern contemporary archaeological work doesn't penetrate literary studies much.
No.
Right? Like it's a weird, scandalous statement to make that you can't take material culture as a fact in Beowulf, right? That's still a scandalous like comment to make. And it comes out of like where our discipline came from. Right?
Yeah.
And it came from like philology, which is like historical linguistics plus literature plus archaeology.
Yeah.
And so everything is woven together in a concatenation of a single interpretation, which we knew already, but here it is confirming it, right? And it's so much what Dan McCullen deals with in his videos, right? This garbage, weird archaeology by like suspiciously fascist German archaeologists at the turn of the century, and how we have to believe that for the Bible, right?
Yeah.
The Beowulf goes through similar issues. It's just
it does. Yeah. And it's all over our museums. It's all over. It's everywhere. And I it's exhausting because I almost like wince when I see Beowulf. Not because I don't like Beowulf, and not because I don't think there's a relationship. But every museum, as Beowulf, as the contemporary source Beowulf said, I just did a blog post critiquing another prestigious museum for it's sloppy. It's just like there's no thought into it, and it's like and I'm not saying we shouldn't make reference to it because it's a way in for audiences, but it's literally the sort of it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and it's we can't get away from it. So it's not, and it's all our collective struggles. It's not archaeologists' fault alone, or literature scholars alone, or any other group. But it is the legacy of what we've been trying to deal with. With Sutton Hoo as a Mound One as an assemblage, it just can't get away from it. And I don't know why. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I share your frustrations in how we take, because I think there is an audience for this kind of more innovative way of thinking about things. And I've been doing some collaborations with an artist who does sort of comic books, comic strips, and I think there's a lot of potential for just taking away, because we've been so reliant on sort of people who are trying to entertain us with the story of Beowulf in comic book form. But I think there's other ways we could use comics or other media to try and get around the problem and sort of say, well, this is the Beowulf I'm thinking of. Here's my visualization of it, and even have alternatives. So you could have dragons of different size, or barrows that look more like Hexham or Repton as a crypt rather than as a Neolithic chamber tomb, which is the default assumption. That it's all. So I think there's many ways we can play with the material world of Beowulf. Different, and maybe AI is. I haven't even thought about this, so maybe maybe there's actually something constructive from AI we could actually harness to, or maybe it would just look terrible. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've wondered about that too. Like, I was like thinking about like plugging every 5 translations of Beowulf into AI and say like, what does Beowulf look like? Like, what does Grendel look like? But I see AI generated stuff on videos about Beowulf too. So I'm like, I don't know. But I love that. And there's a huge issue. Like, I think humans, if any like universal thing can be made, is like we're like very romantic people. We like romantic views of the past, like that make us feel like we just want to feel something, right? And we wanted to think that it matters,
Yeah.
Right. So that like the English story builds from Hengist and Horsa to now. And you're like, yeah, well, we know where that goes. And same with the United States. Like, you follow Tad Sturmer as well as I do, right? We know where that goes.
Yeah.
So breaking myths sucks. Like, it's hard work. But because I think it forces us, and this is a grown-up, I think, attitude, it forces us to kind of reevaluate how important we are in the universe and here, right? And that's hard. That's hard to make popular, right? It's like everyone lives in a Werner Herzog universe. It's like
obviously we're all aware of the extremist uses of these stories. Beowulf is another one of these dog whistles that's used alongside pictures of the Sutton Hoo helmet. It's another one of this cluster of white supremacist tropes that various people use, but there is a rich vein of meaningful conversation. There is interest in it, and that we can take away from that sort of avatar. Literally, that's as far as it goes. These people don't have any engagement with anything beyond that. And and you're author one of the key books now, teaching Beowulf, practical approaches. So do you think there's hope that we can wrestle Beowulf from the grips of these fantasists with scholarly approaches, or do you think there's always going to be more new nonsense out there? I don't know whether you're feeling optimistic or not.
Yeah, no, I'm not sanguine, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to try.
No.
Because what you said, something I think that's worth pointing, like reiterating, is that a lot of those people that are using it as an avatar have not actually read the book.
No,
right?
No.
They don't know in Old English for sure, but they maybe read Burton Raffel like 20 years ago, and that's one of the old translator. They maybe read him in high school when they were like 14 and don't remember it, right? That's why. So yeah, I love like informed and challenging graphic novel adaptations, like the Santiago Garcia that comes out, that sort of amps up this kind of sexual tension without being Angelina Jolie in heels, but also turns the monsters into a kind of palette of continuity with the savage world around it, right?
Yeah.
Like every page has a predatory animal on it, right?
Yes.
It's all in black, red, and gold. It's a beautiful book.
Yes, I like that version. But every version I find, it gives me a different. It's not right or wrong. I just I hadn't thought of it that way. It's another person's reading, isn't it? And that's why I think it can be, the museum pickled authoritative version of Beowulf matched to the archaeology can be so pernicious, because it even if the archaeologists and scholars that collaborate on these things, I'm not picking on any one in museum, but there's so many I could pick on, they're not that way inclined, but it's just the result becomes this very fossilized fixed view of this is the relationship, and I find that really stifling when we have so much potential for creative new ones.
Part of that is that museum curators feel like they have to appeal to as broad a community as possible, and they get money from the government. So we do hear there's like institutions that promote the study of Western civilization in this country, and they want you to say, manifest destiny shit. So there's those aspects. But that part of my research project right now, writing this translations beyond the horizon that I'm working on my Substack, but then writing and these translations that I'm working on, is how do we use translation to promote multiplicity and multivocality? Of like everybody has a stake in this, and everybody can make an interpretation, and that might bring a more diverse and vigorous population into Old English literary studies. The queers, people of color, right? Women, more people that are not going to be these old white dinosaurs. So I see myself and I say, look, I'm in the door. I'm gonna break it open for y'all, right? But like thinking about the riddle, and that's why I think about the riddles the way I do, is that there's this pervading, absolutely crushing insistence that a riddle only has one answer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And you say, okay, that's fine. Why do you have 5 that no one has ever figured out an answer for then? At least 5. And then why do other why can't people make perfectly good arguments for others? Right? Like the point of it is not to answer, to solve, to reduce complexity, but to talk about it.
But surely in the early Middle Ages,
possible.
people weren't sitting there going, "Now that's the answer, young Athelwulf or whatever. Now go outside." Because everyone in the early Middle Ages spoke like an 1950s actor from.
Yeah, exactly.
But this idea of.
Yeah, no, but there wasn't anything to do if you weren't talking, conversing, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you did in mead halls, in the refectories. You talked. People had they could read all day, they could work all day, they could rape and pillage all day. But when you get the people together, a riddle is to create conversation. And if you just say no, it's a hawk, then you have to give a new riddle, right? Like it's kind of it's just not a key for a fun night. Right?
It's
like
the most boring early Middle Ages possible. Of oh, that's the answer. Now we're moving on. It's like a pub quiz. That's 30 minutes over with, and then what else are they going to be doing? It needs to be. It's a banter. It's an argument. It's a conversation. Yeah, I think that's so healthy and so actually authentic, because I think one of the things that's often said about multiplicity reasons, but what about the true one original? But actually, it's more authentic to imagine these societies over a broad stretch of time, where Beowulf, if we could fit it into and move it through, our cultures of conversation, of dialogue, of argument, of, I think that's much more authentic than imagining there was one.
Yeah, and the idea, I mean, we get a kind of we kind of are stuck on the other side of a Puritan epistemology, but also this kind of Platonic idea that everything has to be true form somewhere else, and there's one answer, and it's got to be God. But like the people in the Middle Ages, if they were literate and trained in monasteries or university schools, were trained in dialectic. All they wanted to do was promote suggestions and talk it out, right? So that's why you get weird monsters, because they're just like, hey, what if the dude had a face in his chest? You're like, run with it, man, go for it, right? Sure, it's possible. God can do everything. But something you had mentioned in there that really strikes true for me is this insistence by very retrograde, regressive kinds of scholars. There's a kind of new movement of very conservative scholars, younger people being really conservative.
Really? I didn't realize it was quite so. Yeah.
There's a couple. I think most of us make fun of them, but they're there and they get grants and stuff.
Of course they do.
There has to be just one Beowulf, right? Yeah. That there is an ideal form of Beowulf that was composed at 670, and that one or two scribes ruined in the one version of it we have. And it's like codicology doesn't believe this stuff anymore, right? Translation theory, language theory, poetic theory says there doesn't have to be just one thing. And we know that authors aren't the final arbiter of anything they write.
Exactly.
It's not that deep, right? So, and I think it makes Beowulf more interesting to think that there are numerous versions, that there's other stories, that there's we don't have that much poetry. We have 32,000 lines extant.
Exactly.
Right? And in a very small group of places. So we don't have everything, right? We don't have all the possible stories.
Well, I would just for audiences, we will put a description in the description, all the links where you can learn more about Dr. Hostetter's work, and there's so much more we could talk about here, but I wanted to just open up for any final thoughts you might have for anyone thinking of reading Beowulf or engaging with this, the ongoing debates about Beowulf scholarship. What would be your sort of advice?
Geez. Yeah. Don't be scared of medieval literature. If you like video games and you like Dungeons and Dragons, you like Game of Thrones, you like medieval literature. The language is a little complicated, but you'll get used to it. If you want to find a translation of Beowulf that you like, that's useful, really exciting, read Maria Devana Headley's translation.
Yes.
I'm not going to grab it. It's so exciting. It's so relevant. And it challenges the values of the text that as received, right? But the thing is that every translation is an opinion. It's an interpretation. And if you don't like that one, you can find another one. And if you want to know more, you could read several. Also, I have a website called the Old English Poetry Project. It is we'll give them a link.
Yes, I will.
It has my translations of pretty much everything major, including Beowulf. But like I say, I prefer hers. And some of them are sort of my more modern retranslations that are kind of funky and weird. What else? But we desperately need people who are critical thinkers, who are interested in material culture but don't want to reduce it to things, get reductive answers or universal kind of answers. We need people of other backgrounds and educational entitlements and identities. Like the more people talking about the Middle Ages will make the subject richer.
Absolutely. And it's it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor, and I've learned
so much.
shed loads talking to you. And of course, you're steadfast in your TikToking as well. So I will put all the links in the description for people to follow up. But just to say thank you so much for this. It's been really fun.
So much for this. I've had you say it's a long interview. I could talk forever about this stuff. So like, I really am glad for the opportunity to sit and chat with you. Of course, you have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend, all right?
Follow Archaeodeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.